Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome back to the show Cheyney Ryan, who is a senior research fellow at Oxford University's Institute for Ethics, Law, and Armed Conflict, where he focuses on nonviolence, pacifism, and the critique of just war theory. He has been named one of the leading scholars in peace and conflict studies by the Washington Post and received the Joseph J. Blow Prize from the Society for Advancement of American Philosophy for significant contributions to the history of American philosophy. He is co-chair of the Oxford Consortium for Human Rights and has received wide recognition for his work on social justice, including an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Quinnipiac University for his steadfast commitment to peace on our planet. And he happens to also be the son of the star of this film, Robert Wise. Cheyney, welcome back. So good to have you again.
Robert Ryan, not Robert Wise.
Oh, sorry, Robert Wise. Geez, too many Roberts in this film. Robert Ryan, of course. For people who haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I'll just read a brief synopsis. Expecting the usual loss, a boxing manager takes bribes from a betting gangster without telling his fighter. This was directed by Robert Wise. It was written by Art Cohn, and it starred, of course, Robert Ryan, Audrey Totter. It's got a wonderful supporting cast. I'll just read some for now, but we'll get into more. George Tobias, Alan Baxter, Wallace Ford, Percy Helton, Hal Baylor, Daryl Hickman, Kevin O'Morrison, James Edwards, of course, David Clark, Edwin Max, so many. Do you remember the first time you saw this, Cheyney? I imagine it was on TV at a certain point.
It was certainly on TV, and I honestly don't remember the first time I saw it. I think they probably started showing these movies late 60s, 1970s. I have seen it at least once in a movie theater. They were doing a program of my dad's movies in San Francisco one year. And so it's always interesting to see these movies actually on screen because a lot of his movies I've only seen on television. I've never seen them on screen. And since such an interesting looking movie and its look is so much a part of what the movie is, that was important to me, and it helped me look at the movie again. Yeah.
Did your father ever talk much about his experience on this film with you or with your siblings?
I don't remember him talking about it that much. Uh, I mean, I was actually born the year the movie was made. So by the time I was cognizant of what the discussions were, a lot of time had passed and movies been made. He felt a strong bond with Robert Wise because Wise also directed Odds Against Tomorrow.
Right.
Uh, and those two movies are clearly, in the top of my father's work. Um, so he talked about Wise, but I don't remember. It's too bad because I would love to talk to him now about the movie and particularly about the boxing part of it, which I think is more interesting than some people may realize in terms of how it's staged and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But no, this was a movie that was, probably receded in memory by the time I was up and about.
Well, I read that your father was one of the your father had said it was one of the best things he felt he did, one of his favorite performances that he gave, and Robert Wise also felt it was one of his best films that he directed. So they certainly spoke highly of it. I actually didn't realize. I read last night that as you know, Howard Hughes, who took over RKO around this time, tried to cancel the film. And look, did you ever read that?
I only read it preparing to
Oh,
talk to
okay.
you about it. I mean, I may have run across that fact in the past. I do know that uh, Howard Hughes was not just in charge of RKO, but meddling with it significantly. A man my mother referred to as certifiably insane. And this was even before he literally became insane, I guess. Um, but the movie, I was surprised to read, the movie did very well financially. They made it in 20 days, and
Yeah.
it was a very short shoot. But according to what I read, doing some background reading, it did well. So, and it's interesting because it's a challenging movie, I think, to watch.
Mm-hmm. It's the only unfortunate thing was that it was overshadowed by the film Champion that year, which is another boxing noir, which went on to get, I think, a number of Academy Award nominations. And I know Eddie Muller said maybe that must have stung Robert Ryan to see Kirk Douglas get nominated, and he did it. I don't know if it did. I don't know if that was important to your father awards, and was that anything he cared about?
I'm sure he cared about it at that stage in his career. You couldn't help but care about it. I have to say, I have never seen Champion, and I also haven't seen, I think it's Body and Soul, which is
Oh,
another boxing movie. I actually intend to watch them now, having looked into this a little bit. My father had a low opinion of the movie Champion. I know that. So that must have been context of a discussion of the setup. Uh, I don't, he actually never spoke ill of another actor, but I don't think he thought much of the movie. And I'm sure that was in the context of feeling the setup is a better movie. And I think history regards the setup as a superior movie. I know Scorsese talks about it all the time, and I've never
oh
heard
yeah,
anyone talk about Champion as a
yeah.
big influence. But it would be interesting. I partly because of our discussion here, I'm going to go look at these movies. I've never seen them.
Well, I only saw Champion once, and I don't remember much about it, but I intend to see it again. Body and Soul is a great movie with John Garfield and Canada Lee. Is really good, but it's much more sentimental as opposed to this, which feels grittier and realistic. It's a similar ending where Garfield refuses to take a dive, and
Hmm.
it becomes clear that he's going to be killed for it, but he's portrayed much more in a heroic sense for not having done so. Whereas this film just feels it feels there's nothing heroic or sentimental about it. I mean, the poor guy, as you know, gets his hand smashed and by with a brick, and it's sort of a happy accident, a happy ending in a way, but it's much more complex. But I'm sure we'll get into it. Remind me, I know when we first met, I must have asked you if you met Robert Wise because your father worked with him twice. Did you ever meet him? I can't remember if you said you
I
did.
probably did, but again, I would have been the last movie Dad worked with was Odds Against Tomorrow, which is I think around 1959,
Yeah.
1960. And I was still, and now the setup was filmed in Los Angeles, but again, I was literally born the year it was made. I might have met him, but I've heard him. Uh, I when they did a memorial for my dad when he passed away in Los Angeles, and Wise was one of the people that the person who put it together interviewed, and he talked
Oh,
at length about. Yeah, it was interesting. Wise and Fred Zinnemann and a couple of the real A-list directors Dad worked with talked about his work and him as an actor. But again, if I'd met Wise, I would have been very young. I don't remember it.
hmm. Yeah, well, he's such a great filmmaker because it's incredible all the movies he did. They're all almost every single one is completely different, so many different genres, and but made some fantastic film noir movies like this one and Odds Against Tomorrow, which you and I discussed. This one, what's interesting here is that there's other than the style, there's nothing really obvious about it. That's a film noir. Much more the style to me. What did anything pop out to you that speaks thematically film noir to you?
One thing I felt, and I'd be interested in your response to this. Um, film the film noir genre is very much a post World War II genre. and an enormous number of those movies, particularly the ones in the late 40s and early 50s, um, are involve people who are veterans of war and have gone off the rails in one way or another. Act of violence is, I think we've talked about
Yeah,
act of
we discussed
violence,
that. Yeah.
right? Where dad and the two major male figures were in the military together, and there's this kind of sense of despair that lurks over it. I actually thought watching it again, I have to say, I've probably seen the movie 3 or 4 times. Dad is not just the veteran, but he's like the guy in the locker room who's like the sergeant.
Yeah.
Like he's like it's like a war movie. Is that he's the guy who's kind of been around, and the locker room is right out of one of those movies where it's the multicultural platoon. You have the Italian guy, you have the black guy, you have the guy who's got PTSD and doesn't even know who he is by the end. So I did feel that besides the fact that it looks like a film noir, uh, I did feel that there was this kind of sense of the veteran of the battle who's been doing it too long, who's unappreciated, who's an outcast. Just as in Best Years of Our Lives, the only job that Dana Andrews can get is at a soda fountain. Dad wants to get a cigar stand for a living. So I did feel that there was this kind of post-war vibe to it,
Yeah.
and I had not noticed that at all. I mean, maybe I'm reading it into it, but I did feel that connected it with film noir in a way that I had probably not thought of before.
That's an interesting connection. I didn't think of it that way, but I can certainly see it now that as you described it. But yeah, you're right, because he's not a war veteran, but he's a boxing a boxing veteran. You could say in a sense that in a conventional sense, in the film noir genre or style, as people look at it, that he's the doom protagonist in a sense, because we know from the beginning that he's being set up, that no one's telling him, and we just have this feeling that this is not going to go well. What makes it a little different is often the doom protagonist is doing something wrong, but they're aware of it, whereas he's never aware of it, and by the time he's aware of it, it's really, he's not going to give it up after fighting the way he was. I can totally understand why he wouldn't throw the fight even after finding out that it's a setup and he has to go down. He knows this criminal world, and but certainly the style. But as I was watching Eddie Muller talk about it on TCM, and he said if there's an official sport movies within noir, it's certainly boxing, because as we talked about, champion body and soul in this one, and this is my favorite out of all of them, because it feels the most realistic. But the when we first see your father in the film, I really like that scene he has with Audrey Totter, who plays his girlfriend. um or it's not clear if they're married or not, but he seems to think that he just needs one more punch, and even if he wins, there'll be a rematch, there'll be more money in it for him, that he can get something like $500 and buy a piece of a fighter. And she's just totally tired of all this and wants to move on, sick of seeing him get hurt or lose. But there's an element between the two of them that's torn, I felt, because she still has that ticket there that he gives her to go and see the fight. She's tempted to go, and she ultimately is about to and then doesn't. And I think ultimately he's torn too, whether to continue fighting or to just give it up at this point. But I can understand why after doing it for 20 years, he can't think of what else can he do. It's like a fighter fights. Was that your impression, that they sort of had that element of being torn in two, the two of them?
I did. I thought it was very interesting. Uh, I mean, one thing that's interesting about the movie is that there's really one scene between Robert Ryan and Audrey Totter. I mean, there's a kind of a reconciliation at the end. I don't remember. It's a very long scene. It's almost like it's like act of violence. It's like it's tagged on at the end to kind of make you feel a little bit better from what you've seen. Uh, and I actually liked it enormously because now the protocol is that the boxer has a wife, Adrian, or Jim Braddock's wife in Cinderella Man.
Oh yeah.
She doesn't like violence. She's worried he'll get hurt. But in the end, she comes to the fight, or in the end, she listens to it, and in the end, she's exultant about what happened. This is the anti
Yeah.
that. I
I
mean,
never
the
thought of that.
whole
That's true.
no, the whole movie, she doesn't want to come. She's not happy about it. She wanders around, Pottersville, which is a classical film noir, dance hall girls, and I don't know if you noticed that the hotel in its advertisement it says it has both hot and cold water.
No, I didn't.
I didn't know that was a selling point back then. Uh, and so yeah, she's wandering around, Phoenix City with all the people hitting on her. The guy who hits on her is Tommy Noonan, who interestingly had a little career of his own. He appeared in several Jane Mansfield movies in the 1960s.
Oh
Um,
yes.
uh, you know, but she doesn't really want to have anything to do with it. And by the end of it, she still doesn't want to have anything to do
Right.
with it.
Right.
So I thought the movie was very interesting. It took it in a different direction. It really was an anti-boxing movie.
Yeah.
Ironic that my father, who loved boxing, would make such a critical movie.
Yeah, of course it goes into the corruption as well, and the crime element there, and buying fighters and setups, and again, as Eddie Muller said, it's the film noir. It's the film noir sports film. By the way, I forgot to mention to you, like I got a chance to interview Eddie a couple of times last year, and my icebreaker was that I knew you.
Oh, okay.
I was like, "Have you ever met Cheyney?" But he mentioned that he met your sister.
Yeah, I think Eddie and I have communicated once or twice about trivia, but yeah, he knows my sister Lisa. So,
Right.
well, I'm glad you got some points from that connection, Robert.
Yeah, well, he loves your father, of course, like all like most film noir, people do, or movie fans in general. I have the DVD here, and the commentary track is with Robert Wise and Scorsese. And one thing I like that Scorsese said was that it feels so realistic, but yet it feels more like a painting of something realistic. And what he meant was because of it's stylized, because they're using the noir style of German expressionism. It's not. I used to think it felt like a documentary, but it really doesn't. It's very. It is very stylized, and the noir for me really pops when they're chasing him at the end, and he's running through the arena, and outside in the alley is very dark, shadow and light. Was that also your impression, just of the overall style of the film?
Yeah, I think so. Film noir is traditionally claustrophobic. Um, um, Half of the movie takes place in that dressing room,
Yeah.
which is not big enough for the people
Right.
in it.
Right.
Um, the boxing match is filmed in a way that you feel like you're kind of on top of it in a way that often is not true in the movies. And then the final ending, I think the photo of dad about to be beaten up by little boy and the other people is
Oh yeah.
it's certainly one of the more reproduced pictures of my father.
Oh
And it has,
yes.
again, yeah, it has this sense of, film noir is about claustrophobia. It's about I can't get out.
Right.
It's about I have nothing else to do. And it's also about, and I don't really know what's going on. I mean, the thing about Dad's character is that he's part of this con, but no one will tell him. Uh, and that's a classical film noir. I mean, look at Chinatown. I mean, Chinatown, first of all, is about a veteran. Now, he's not a veteran of war, but he's someone who's been in the police force too long. That's another spin on that. And Chinatown is about he's been dragged into something. He doesn't know what's going on.
Right. Right.
And there's this kind of the presumably heroic character is someone is the only one who doesn't really know what's happening to him, and that's really the anti-hero theme, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. He's certainly stuck from the beginning to the end. And that comes through, like you said, visually, because those cramped spaces. It's also a fairly small apartment right across from the arena. As they're crowding him at the end, he's got nowhere to go, nowhere to run. I found that it was also ironic that we have this wide shot high up where he's this guy who just won in this arena is now running, and it's totally alone. No one's there, and here he is running for his life. I thought how ironic, and kind of sums up this poor guy's career, in a
And the
sense.
guy, one of the guys who's beating him up, is the boxer he just beat in the
Yeah.
ring. It's interesting that when you have uh, apparently a conceit of these boxing movies that the guy who the hero is going to beat up always has blonde hair, because I remember in Cinderella Man, Corn Griffin, is this kind of blondish looking guy, and Tiger Nelson, he looks like Troy Donahue. He doesn't look like he belongs.
Right.
Robert Ryan looks like he belongs in that ring. And the other guy looks like he's just some pretty boy, that they're trying to promote, and yet,
Yeah.
yeah, he gets his licks in at the end. So much for winning in the ring.
Right. Well, I remember when we spoke about this film before, you had mentioned that because your father was a fighter. He even won a title, I believe. I forget what it was. Was that in college when he was in school?
Yes, it was in college. Yeah, he was a
Right.
college professor.
And you had mentioned that he intentionally fought in a way so that because Stoker was like a mediocre fighter. And so he basically tried to box in a way that was worse than your father's own ability. And I remember at first thinking, well, how could that be? Because he wins the fight, but then when I saw it again, but this other guy is not it's not probably a very good fighter either. He's just
Well,
some pretty kid that they're trying to make money off of. I mean, I'm sure
yeah,
Kay, but
no, I actually made a point of looking at that because I think you and I had once talked about it, looking specifically at that. Um, yeah, Dad in the movie is a very bad boxer, and I was wondered, he's here he was in reality a good boxer, and the one movie he makes about boxing, he has to play a bad boxer.
right.
Uh, and I would say, I don't know if we mentioned this, but I studied boxing when I was younger, and so I know I was not successful at all, but I probably know a little bit more about boxing than some people and have followed it. Everything he does in the ring is wrong. I mean, just the fact that he's constantly throwing punches that hit the air and he falls down. I mean, what does that tell you about what kind of boxer he is?
Right.
He falls down. He's constantly off balance. He constantly leads with his right hand, which is a serious no-no in boxing, because when you lead with your right hand, you're leaving yourself totally exposed to the other person. So it's almost as if everything he does is wrong. And I did notice that there was a boxing advisor in the movie. So I don't think Dad could take all the credit for knowing what a bad boxer is like.
Oh, I see.
And I was going to look into who that was, but uh, they obviously spent time thinking about what would boxers like that, who are on the undercard in a nowhere
Right.
town. What kind of boxers would they be? But the thing is that there's this theme in the movie of it just takes one punch.
Right.
And that's in some sense that's how Dad wins the thing is
Yeah.
that he's flailing away and blah blah blah, but finally he gets the guy. He starts to land a couple of punches. So that's kind of bears that out. Is it only takes one punch, and of course in the movie it's set up that he thinks, well, if I can win this, then I'll continue boxing. See?
Right.
Which of course Audrey Totter, that's the last thing she wants. So in some sense, the fact that he gets his hand broken at the end is able to kind of wrap that up
Yes.
in a kind of a happy way.
Right.
But I no I a couple of other remarks about the boxing if you'd be interested in this. Um, Heavyweight boxers don't fight that way. Um, if you watch particularly of that era, they don't sit there and pound each other. A lighter box, like Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta fought that way, but you didn't see heavyweight boxers fight that way, and that was probably done for the purposes of the movie because
Right.
if they'd filmed it the way a real boxing match looked with heavyweights, it would just not have been that interesting.
Oh, I
Uh,
see.
you see, there wouldn't have been enough happening.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Plus, they chose what Scorsese talks about uh, in what I read about him is that the boxing is filmed from outside the ring,
Yeah.
so that you have a sense that you're just one of the spectators, and they keeps cutting to
Yes.
the other spectators. Whereas I did look at part of Raging Bull, and it's all done from the perspective of the fighters.
Yeah. It's right inside the ring. Yeah.
It's inside the ring. It's what the fighters are presumably seeing. And I had not thought about that until I heard Scorsese talking about it
Yeah.
in one of the commentaries. So that's quite interesting. And he was very impressed. I don't know enough about editing, but Scorsese was very impressed with the editing of the movie, and talks about how Robert Wise, was at one point the A-list editor before he was an A-list director
Oh,
because
yes. Yes. He
he
did
edited
Citizen
Citizen
Kane.
Kane. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Magnificent Ambersons. He also edited. Um, yeah. Scorsese he admires this film so much that he didn't want to. I suppose he was concerned that when he shot Raging Bull, he would subconsciously try to copy it. So he was like, I gotta make sure I don't copy the setup. And he really didn't. Because as you said, he went inside the ring, and this film is mostly outside the ropes. So you feel like you're right
right,
in the front row. Would you
yeah.
happen to know, when you watch the other fighter, is he also portrayed as someone who can't fight very well, like Stoker? Is he also fighting badly?
I actually thought he fought better at the beginning. I actually thought, and in some sense, this would make sense from the filmmaker's point of view, is that in the first round or two, you make the opponent look like a better boxer, and he's certainly quicker, which is what he would be as he was younger. Now, I don't know that the guy who I don't know the actor's name, but he apparently had some boxing
Yeah,
experience.
he was a boxer as well.
Yeah, no, he looked at the beginning of it. He looked like he was a better boxer. I mean, you certainly don't have any. You certainly don't have any moments like you do with my dad of him throwing wild punches and literally falling down in the process. I mean, Tiger
Right.
Nelson doesn't do that. So you get the sense that it really was the last punch.
Yeah.
And usually the sense is that it's the grit of the veteran, that gets through it all and
Hmm.
whatever. But I thought the boxing was very interesting. I didn't remember that well, and I looked at it specifically for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very exciting fight. I mean, even though, as you said, I mean, maybe if you know more about boxing, you're looking at all the sort of theatricalities of it, or that that he's not a very good fighter, but it's still it feels so real. And I realize you touched on. I love how they cut to all the various spectators, and they're not just cutting to a bunch of people cheering. It's all like you have the one guy who's also listening to the baseball game on the radio, and the guy with the cigar throughout, and the women calling for blood, and the people betting, and you got that one big guy, and he's going from a burger to a hot dog. um, it it feels, I hadn't seen that in a lot of fights where they really go through the crowd, and I mean, in a way, that was is something a little daring about that because it can almost become too funny, maybe. But it works beautifully. There's a blend of humor there that I thought just feels organic. I don't know how you felt about that. Those
No,
people,
you're right. In fact, now that I think of it, I wonder if anyone else has ever done it. I mean,
I don't think so.
they made those they made them characters in their own right.
Yeah.
And they gave them even, the heavy set guy. Yeah, he starts out with a hot dog, and then he moves on to a candy bar. So they don't, and the woman who's screaming has her own little narrative arc of at the beginning of the movie. She says, "I don't like blood."
Right, right, right.
Uh, when the boxing begins, she's saying to Tiger Nelson, "Kill him." And then when Robert Ryan does better, she's now rooting for him. So she has a little story. One of the actors was Herb Anderson, who was a friend of my father's, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and mainly because his daughter Babby was in the same elementary school or whatever that we were in, and
Oh, I see.
they might have gone to drama school together. And he was another guy who was around forever. He was on TV. He played Dennis the Menace's father in the
Oh, wow.
Dennis the Menace TV show. But he was another guy. Was like I love this movie because I love these actors, that have
Yeah,
30-year careers as supporting players. They're so good.
yeah,
They're what make Hollywood real, in my opinion.
yeah. I mean, so many of them because there's all these small parts, but they're all so, as you said, distinctive and well defined, and it's almost like they have their own little stories in the smallest of moments. I love the even the beginning, and Robert Wise, he's mostly moving the cameras. Is that when you got the newspaper man arguing over, where to stand and who should be selling and things like that, and then as you mentioned, the couple fighting about whether they should even go in or not, and then the trainers. I really like that one gesture of lighting his match right where it says Stoker Thompson, and that just spoke volumes. I mean, what an image of his attitude towards this poor guy. But
And
why?
it's actually the occasion of I think it's probably one of my two or three favorite lines in all of my father's movies. Not necessarily that he gives the line, but at the very beginning of the movie, they asked Stoker Thompson's manager. Stoker Thompson asks his manager asks where he is, and the guy says, "Well, he's home getting a nap," and his manager says, "Doesn't he get enough sleep in the ring?" Yeah, the opening. Well, the movie. It's only an hour and 10 minutes long.
Yeah, it's all in real
It
time.
it feels longer. It always surprising to me that the movie is really does not, and I think it just has so much of these elements that I don't know how you felt about it, Robert, but I felt like the movie was longer than it
Yeah, it
was. It
does in a
has,
good way. Yeah,
yeah, in a good way. It has a lot of stuff going on, and the fight sequence is 20 minutes long. That's a big
right.
part of that movie. So
Yeah,
it's a short movie with a long fight sequence, and yet you have all these memorable characters
yeah.
and moments and stuff. Yeah, no, I was I have to say, when we've talked before about some of my dad's movies, I think my feeling about it is probably pretty much what it always was after reviewing it. But this one, I came away much more impressed with it.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Yeah, no, it's true. It because there's so much packed into it and so many people, and it is hard to believe it is so short. And what I find so compelling about the dressing room sequence is that all of those characters, in a sense, are sort of a reflection of him because we have the young man who's very nervous about his first fight, which when he's like a teenager, and that reminds Stoker of his first fight 20 years before. Then we have the one man with the Bible, and he's more religious, and he's this element of faith. Well, the faith will has a faith in winning, and that also appeals to Stoker because he has that about himself. And then the black boxer talks a little like him, but it just takes one punch, which appeals to him as well. But then you have that other character who's totally delusional, and he keeps talking about, well, Frankie Manila, who won a championship lost 21 times before he went anywhere. And then we see when this guy goes and fights, he gets killed. And as he comes back, not literally killed, but he loses badly. And he can't even remember his name. And that,
His
I
name,
think
yeah.
that really scares Ryan, your father who plays Stoker. And it, because he sort of has those same delusions as we see with his girlfriend. Just, he seems to think he can keep going at this point. So I really like how all those people are really a side of him in a sense. Was that your impression, or did you see?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I actually, again, I mean, I hope I can be forgiven for being so enthusiastic about one of my own father's movies. I should
No, not
say
at all.
there are a great many that I don't have the same warm feelings about.
Well, neither
I
did
thought
he,
that
as I remember from
I,
the book, the
I thought
biography.
that locker room sequence was fabulous. Again, I don't know. Usually in these fight movies, the locker room is just the fighter and the old manager, giving him a pep talk. There's no one else around. This is the only, again, I haven't seen these other movies, but this is more realistic. I mean, they're all stuffed in this room together. Uh, and you're right. There's every sort of generation of fighter there. There's the college kid who throws up before he goes out. There is James Edwards, I think, is kind of the most significant person in the room, and I think in terms of, first of all, Dad connects with him in a way that he doesn't with the other. He mainly just encourages the others. And you're right that the older guy who is totally punch drunk by the end is kind of the image of what Audrey Totter says
Right.
Robert Ryan is going to end up. He's looking the future in the face.
Yeah.
Um, um, no, I actually, in fact, if I had been asked, what if we had 5 or 10 minutes to this movie, I would have said, let's have more of the locker room,
Mm,
because I thought but the other thing about it, I noticed, Robert, um, my dad really doesn't say much in the movie. Um,
it's true.
uh, I believe it or not, I actually have the script around somewhere,
Oh,
but I
wow.
didn't have, yeah, I have the original script somewhere, and
His copy.
yeah,
Oh,
I
wow.
have
Well,
it.
if you're ever
Um,
short of change, you can always.
um, I was going to look at it because both Robert Ryan and Audrey Totter mainly react to what's going on. Neither one of them really says much, I think, in the movie. In the locker room, most of what you see is Robert Ryan reacting to what the other people are saying, and you clearly, that's what's being conveyed, is what he's thinking about. But then is, keep it up, kid, good luck. And
Yeah.
and even Audrey Totter in the sequence with her part of the movie, she's just walking around looking at things.
Yeah.
She
Right.
hardly says anything. It's
Yeah.
all in her face. And I would imagine, you're an actor. You tell me, but I would think actually that would be red meat for an actor,
Yes.
is
And it's harder
having to
as well.
having to
Yeah.
convey stuff without saying a lot. And
Mm.
I think that's was again probably one of the reasons why it was one of my father's favorite movies.
Mm. Yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out because you're right. Audrey Totter, particularly the sequence where she's looking at the streetcars below, and then she finally decides to rip up her ticket, and her behavior speaks volumes. And I couldn't help but point out that the streetcar is certainly an obvious metaphor for her to get on there and get the hell out of Paradise City. But it's true, yeah. Stoker doesn't say the most dialogue is the first scene with him and Audrey Totter, and I also like when he keeps looking out the window to see if the lights are gonna go off, and which signals to him that she's coming. And the first time the lights are still on and you see how disappointed he is, and then when the lights are off you see that he gets happy. And even later, when he finally gets in the ring and he looks and the seat is empty. I also liked that they were booing him and calling him an old man and all this stuff, and then when he wins, there's no celebration. Everyone just, it's so casual. It just, everyone in that arena just walks out, and this guy just you know, gave so much of himself um, in that fight, and it's also crushing that he has to go on after the main event because it's not on the radio, so no one cares.
Right. Yeah, he's all alone in the ring. I mean, his ringside people have all deserted him.
Right,
So he wins the fight, and there's no one even in his corner to congratulate him.
right.
And he wanders off. I was wondering if when he leaves the ring, if Tiger Nelson was gonna, say good fight, but no.
Yeah,
Tiger Nelson is angry that he was supposed to win the fight, and so there's no kind of celebration of anything. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
No, it's it. I also, again, your father had such a great reaction when he's in the locker room and he says, when he's asking where his trainers are, and they say, oh, they're not here, and then you see him sort of jolt up, and that's when it dawns on him, oh wait, they told me about throwing the fight. My impression was that he completely forgot that they even said that. And which, again, I could understand when your adrenaline is pumping and you're fighting and the cheering, and he has that decision, should I throw the fight or not, and then he decides, I'm not going to do that. And he goes ahead with it, but I love that reaction he had, and now he has to deal with it, and he denies it as best he can, but
yeah, he
that was
says, I
not going
didn't
to
know.
work.
No one told me.
Right.
The film noir clueless guy. It's usually a woman that is, you know, bringing the character into a spider web. It's not the case here, but uh, it, and it's sort of fate, right? It's kind of like this is what's been dealt to me. Um,
Yes.
what did you think of Audrey Totter? I mean, I have to say, I don't know anything about this woman. I mean, she had a long career. I looked at some of her other movies. There's one or two of them that I've seen, uh, but she's quite good in this film. But I
Yeah.
really don't. Maybe she was. Maybe being at RKO ended her career. I don't know. She did a lot of television afterwards, and I know that she had a good career. But I didn't see any films that she was in, which are now remembered. I think even by people like us who know old movies.
Yeah, I like her a lot, particularly in this. I haven't seen her in a lot of films. She was also in the Robert Montgomery noir Lady in the Lake, which is not that great. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I know of. No, I haven't seen it. I know of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's all from the entire film is a POV shot from Robert Montgomery. So visually it was interesting that you never see him. You only
Oh,
see him
right.
in the
Yeah,
mirror, the reflection in the mirror occasionally. But he also directed it, and she's in it. I've seen her in some other things, but apparently, um, Wise wanted Joan Blondell for the part, and Howard Hughes Howard Hughes said didn't feel that her. I don't know if he actually said this, but Eddie Muller said, "Well, she doesn't have nice bosoms or something." From his point of view, of course, he was
right.
that kind of a guy, Hughes. And the compromise was Audrey Totter because Hughes apparently said, okay, well, her bosoms are good enough. And then Wise thought that her acting was good enough. So she was this poor woman. What a way to get cast. But that's show business.
That that's show business. Yeah, it certainly was. Now, I wanted to shout out for James Edwards
Oh, yeah,
in this
yeah.
in this movie. Um, he did a couple. He did at least one other movie with my dad called Men in War, which is an exceptionally good
Yes.
movie.
I haven't seen that yet. I've been meaning
Well, you
to.
should watch it. It's a film noir war movie.
Yeah.
It's claustrophobia, to the hilt of this. And it's been very high. I've seen it listed among the very best war movies.
Yeah. So have I.
It's these this one platoon in the middle of nowhere trying to find some hill. They don't know why. And James Edwards, I know that movie pretty well because I saw part of it filmed. James Edwards plays this guy Killian, and he's just fabulous in it. Now, I gather that he was a victim of the Blacklist, though.
I actually am
Uh,
not sure. Well, he was also in The Killing. Kubrick's
Well,
classic film.
yeah, well, he was I know that he refused to testify in front of the Un-American Activities Committee,
Oh, okay.
and I've seen reference to his suffering from that. Though if you the only evidence for it, if you look at his credits, is that he didn't have as good a career as one might have expected, because he was in a movie called Home of the Brave, I think, and he was the lead in it in the late 1940s.
Oh, wow.
Big Stanley Kramer movie, big high visibility, um, and I think he's very, very good, and he's actually the only guy in he does a little warming up. I don't know if you remember, in the locker room.
Yeah.
And he actually is the only guy who looks like he knows how to throw a punch. Uh,
Yes.
one of the things about boxing is, one of the ways you know that my father is playing a guy who doesn't know how to box is that he's throwing roundhouse punches. He's
Right.
throwing them like circular punches, where a real boxer throws them like that, you see, like straight ahead. And James Edwards, when he's warming up, he shows he knows how to. Someone taught him
Oh, I
that
see.
this is how you throw a punch. Um, I think he's very good in this, but then he settled into kind of minor roles. He had a long career. He was in Patton. His last good role was in Patton,
Yeah.
and he was in The Sandpiper, one of the truly awful movies, playing a hippie Monterey, California artist. Um, but I thought he was a very good actor, and it's unfortunate if it was the blacklist that kept him from getting better roles, because he really deserved to have an A-list career, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm just looking it up, whether he was blacklisted. I know that the poem that the setup is based on, as I'm sure you know, is based on a poem, and the Stoker was what his name wasn't Stoker in the poem, but he's was a black character. And but at Robert Y said at the time, well, there weren't black stars at the time, which of course uh there weren't. But then I read something else that he apparently wanted Canada Lee, who was in Body and Soul, and he actually was a boxer. So I'm not sure what's right there. And of course, at the time, here we are pre-civil rights. The likelihood that Hollywood was going to cast a black man in a lead is about zero. So as you know, they mainly played servants and housekeepers and porters and stuff, back stereotypical roles. But he was one of the few, like in The Killing, he's one of the only good people in The Killing. Everyone else is horrible, but he's one of the only
Who does
kind
he
of.
remind me who he plays in The Killing? I don't remember him from that.
Well, I've seen it, I reviewed it. I can't remember exactly who he was, but he was someone, he was helping one of the guys, but then he comes, I forget, but he doesn't realize that this guy's a criminal. It's a small part. I'll have to go and check, but he is, Eddie Muller mentioned this as well in The Killing. He was the only uh pretty decent person. And that was about it. But film noir was one of the very few exceptions where occasionally, if there was a black lead or even a black supporting part, that they were pretty good roles, like Body and Soul, Canada Lee. Also, the Breaking. Did you ever see the Breaking Point with
Yeah,
John Garfield?
yeah.
Um, I'm just looking up that actor because he had a very good role in it. Oh, Juano Hernandez,
Hmm.
but again, it was few and far between. So, but I imagine if they were to make it even in the '80s or even in the '70s, by then they perhaps would have gone with a black actor if that's what the poem was. But who knows?
Well, I think, yeah, I they're not gonna they're not gonna cast a black actor
No,
in
not in the
1948.
'40s. Yeah,
Um, and Canada Lee, who had been a exceptionally good boxer before he became an actor, would have been a logical person to do it. Um, Let me just say, though, I don't mean to belabor James Edwards, but I have a soft spot for blacklisted actors. Um, Example, Robert, of what explains this is that he does Home of the Brave. He's gets a lot of recognition in the setup, and then in 1954, he's one of the uncredited black waiters in the Caine Mutiny.
Oh,
He's
wow.
Yeah, uncredited.
Credited, of course. Yeah.
Uh, so he's how do you explain that? That he
Yeah.
goes from featured roles to essentially hardly. He probably doesn't have any lines in that movie, as far as I know.
Right.
So but any event, he great talent, and hung on.
Yeah.
Uh, and as I said, I mean, he pops up in movies every once in a while. I ended up watching The Sandpiper for some reason. I can't explain why. Within the
I
last,
haven't seen that one.
well, I don't recommend it. I have no idea why I watched it actually, but anyway, James Edwards pops up in The Sandpiper, so he was still working. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now Percy Helton is another interesting actor. Um, uh, uh, he had a thousand credits, and it was interesting. I thought he had been in more movies with my dad. I didn't see any others that he'd done, um, but uh, for some reason he was on TV all the time, and
Oh, yes. I was looking up the name. Yeah. He's very, very good. Very funny guy.
he's very distinctive, and he would always be in things like The Twilight Zone, science fiction theater. He had this kind of off kilter dimension to it. And what I I remember I was watching it one time, and my dad wandered in. He hardly ever watched television, but he looked at it for a moment, and he said, "Oh, that's Percy Helton," and he said, "This guy's always trying to borrow money from me." I assume I for some reason I thought they must be good friends, but I remember that remark. Basically, maybe he had a lot of kids and always needed money. I don't know. He
Oh,
worked
that's
forever
funny.
though. He
Oh,
worked
yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
Started out in like the 1920s or something.
Yeah, I love him. I last year saw a film noir that I hadn't heard of, but when I was interviewing Eddie Muller, he in his new book he wrote about it. So it was called Wicked Woman. It's very campy and it's pretty good, and it's sort of a very similar take on The Postman Always Rings Twice. And he's like this seedy hotel manager who is very, very flirtatious with the main femme fatale who's staying there. It's certainly worth seeing, but yeah, I like him a lot. But I just wanted to touch on the ending a little bit, because I thought your father played it so well as his hand is crushed and he's lying there, and at first he says, I can't fight anymore. And I like that he says it in a way which is, he says it quite in a very neutral way, which where you don't really know how he feels about that. Because I think ultimately his feelings about continuing or not are mixed. And whether that was a conscious choice from your father or not, I'm not sure. It's very clear that when he then says, I won tonight, that he's happy about that. And we see, again, Audrey Totter crying, but yet the dialogue is, we both won, So it's so loaded because in the sense that she is happy that he can't continue, but look at him now. He's so beat up. It must be so devastating to see someone you love like that. And in his case, I think we're relieved he's not going to continue anymore, but we're also devastated at the fact that he can't continue anymore because this is who he is. He spent 20 years doing this. Was so committed to it and clearly had a love for it. But there's almost something, there's a shade of gray there, because maybe he's pleased in a sense that he is forced to stop. It's like, well, now he has to go and get that cigar stand or something. But I could talk endlessly about that last scene because I think there's nothing simple in it. I think it is very complex. Was that your impression, or did you see it a different way?
No, I think you're absolutely right. The the ending is, as I said, I mean, they kind of have to give it the the piece that it's based on. The boxer gets killed. I've actually seen a dramatic reading of the setup, the
Oh
original.
wow.
Yeah, they did it in Portland, and I saw it. And with a with a African American actor, they basically just read the piece dramatically. And in that, the actor gets killed in the end. So very,
Right.
very, very, very down ending.
Right.
Well, you can't, really end a Hollywood movie like that in that era.
Right.
Um, but but I think they obviously did not go for the happy ending.
No.
Uh, and I wonder whether be interesting what the discussion was like. Whatever my father did, I can assure you was totally conscious. I mean, they particularly, you know, that scene, you probably, I would imagine it was one of the last scenes that was shot. They shot the boxing sequences in downtown Los Angeles. They shot it in an actual boxing ring.
Yeah. And it took a
So
week
obvious,
apparently. Free
yeah,
cameras. Yeah.
yeah, obviously, so they probably spent a week down at the boxing ring, and then they uh, the rest of it is shot, I'm sure, at RKO Studios. But by the time they got to that, it's probably Wise and my dad and a couple of other people discussing what's going to happen. And I don't, usually, well, because you're an actor. I mean, the director will have his own ideas about it. Um, and but very little is happens by inadvertently in a scene like that. I would imagine that a lot of the discussion of the movie was how to end it,
Right.
because it's complicated. It's so complicated how to
Yeah.
end. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right.
Oh, I think it's really powerful. And if they were forced to not have him die, then they really did find a way which felt very, very real. But but I remember what because I first saw it. Oh, I only first saw it 7 years ago. It wasn't too long ago, the film. And I remember when he's down on the ground and they're holding him, and the guy's about to go in, and I love how the camera pans to the wall and we see a shadow of these musicians and the music gets really, really loud. I again, it's what you don't see is what's scarier sometimes. And I images are flashing through my mind of that they're stabbing him or something. And I was almost relieved when he when he gets up. Thank God they only crushed his hand, because that's what I thought they were gonna do. But then the contrast of him on the ground and then that couple upstairs on the balcony sort of laughing and flirting, they're happy and he's almost dead, and then they look over at him and make fun of him. I think they think he's a drunk or something, and it's so devastating because that's what he's been used to for so many years of getting booed, being called old. I did find it funny that when he looks at the sign at one point when he falls on the mat and it says, "Are you over 35? Try." And it's just all you see is VI. I'm like, does that are they saying Viagra at that?
No, no, I'm sure it's Vitalis.
Oh, okay. I was because I
So
thought they
why
said
that would be for
for
only
that.
people 35? You're right. No, it wouldn't have been Viagra, but why would it have been? No, you're right. He looks it up. I thought it was Vitalis, but now that you mention it, I don't know why that would be something that only older men. For those in the audience who are listening to this, it's a hair thing. You keep your hair in place.
Oh, that's
Um,
what it is. Okay. I always
yeah,
wondered, and it's interesting that it's covered because I thought,
yeah.
I thought maybe they wanted to say Viagra, but they couldn't, maybe because of censorship or something at the time, but I had wondered, what is that? VI, but it's funny. I know obviously that's still the case when you're 35 as an athlete, you're considered older, but I mean ultimately he's still a young man. That's the tragedy of these of athletes sometimes, of any kind. Like one bad injury they can't continue. Or in
Really
his
true of
case, yeah.
boxing. I would say that there's commentary about the fact that it's in real time, that the length of the movie is the same as presumably the length of the action. Um, and there's a number of times where they cut away to clocks. Uh,
Yes, yes.
I
I was
mean,
just
it
going to mention
begins with a
that.
photo of the
Yeah.
clock, but also I think in their bedroom at one point it switches to the clock. And I thought that part of what might have been going on there is that boxing is is very temporal. Not every sport has a time limit, and not every sport is in 3-minute increments, and not every sport is so much around kind of how do I get through the next 3 minutes. So there's a kind of a almost temporal claustrophobia about that. And in the same way that, for instance, in High Noon, which I think is compared to this, it followed it directly, where it's an hour until Frank Miller arrives. The fact that the movie is exactly the same length as the time raises, makes sense in terms of what the dramatic situation is. And I actually thought it made sense to me that a boxing movie would pay so much attention to how much time is passing, and that the finite amount of time would be so important. Now I don't know if that's a stretch, but I think that there's a kind of a thematic uh, uh, there's a thematic point to having
Yeah.
that in a boxing movie. And the fact that they show the whole match is interesting because, they don't do that in boxing movies. They don't show the
No,
whole.
no, no. Yeah.
And finally, I would say this movie, its portrayal of boxing is vastly superior to Raging Bull, in my opinion. Um, I think, I think, I mean, I'm sure Scorsese had advisors, but the way the boxing is shot has nothing to do with boxing. Um, uh, it's so unrealistic what happens in these matches. And also, I would say it's almost as if Sam Peckinpah directed the fighting scenes because you have punches landed and constantly things squirting out. You know how
Oh,
Peckinpah
right.
had blood squirting out, constantly, De Niro's being hit in the face and blood is squirting out and blah. It's over the top, you see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas again, making the case for the setup, much more realistic about
Right.
mainly what the doctors are is tired. That's
Right.
mainly what you are in a boxing match. You're tired. Blood is a factor, but that's not the main thing you worry about. And
Right.
I thought that was very, very realistic. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was also realistic that Robert Ryan's paying. He can hardly hear what's being said to him because he's so tired and so
Right.
focused. Which
Right.
is why, as you said a little while ago, he's told that they've set it up, but it goes
Right.
in one ear and out the other. He really doesn't care. He probably
Right.
doesn't even care.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the clock, yeah, the clock, like that ongoing motif I found really appealing. And Robert Wise on the commentary commented, if you'll notice that towards the end, when Audrey Totter is alone, you could see her reflection in the clock, right? And it's just that haunting element in her life that she's, every time she looks, is it over? Is he dead? Is he, what's happening? And, it's almost worse to not be there. And it's worse to be looking at this clock, which I
Did
found,
Robert Wise? I have to admit I haven't. I intend to now listen to Wise's commentary, but did Wise say anything about the fact that at the very opening of the movie, there's this pan up into the window and through the window, which is right out of Citizen Kane, where the camera goes up, and I thought this is like an homage to Citizen Kane
well,
because
he just mentioned, oh, it's a voyeuristic shot. He didn't explain why he did that because, as you probably know, they usually do that to make the audience feel like, ooh, we're seeing something that we shouldn't see. To go in, that's you see it in Psycho as well. That kind of it's there's something mysterious and daring about it. So I'm not sure why he did it, but
Mhm.
he didn't say why.
Yeah. Um, no, I thought, and the cinematography
Oh
too.
yeah, yeah,
I'm forgetting the man's name.
yeah. I'm just
Siri.
gonna check because I looked up his filmography, but he he was not a noir, not that's what they would call it then, but he was not someone who did a lot of film noir movies. But yeah, it's stunning. It's done so well, and the Robert, a lot of the things that they came up with. Oh, it's Milton R. Krasner is the
Oh, okay.
cinematographer. Yeah. I mean, Art Cohn was a sports writer, so he knew the world, the screenwriter. And as Robert Wise said in the commentary, he's like, when you're a filmmaker, you got to really know your subject. So those things like the guy with the radio listening to the ball game at the same time, these were all things that they saw when they went to fights for research. The only other thing I wanted to mention as we wrap up was I love the part after the one fighter who keeps talking about Frankie Manila. It's the only time they were all sort of together in that locker room because they all look over down at him, and then the camera pans across all their faces, and you get this feeling of fear running through all of their minds of this could be us, as distinctive as they all were, that they all that's one thing that they all this might happen to any of them. They all might get killed or not remember their name or something like that. So I thought that was a powerful choice because he talks about that, he's like, well, if the more you move the camera, it could be distracting for an audience. But he does it in a way where it never feels distracting. It's quite fluid, and um he does it at the perfect times. I felt, so it's really a near perfect film, I'd say. I think it's a wonderful
No, it,
movie.
it it really is, and you're right. There's this kind of, again, in the locker room. There's this sort of bonding, and they kind of rib each other. And at one point, the guy complains how I had $1 bet on you and you lost. But generally, they're supportive. When they come back and they've won, they congratulate them. They're clearly all worried uh,
Yeah.
about what's going to happen. I forget the character's name. And the level of detail. I mean, at one point, Robert Ryan says, if I could get $500, I could buy a piece of Harry Greb. Now, how many people know who Harry Greb was? But Harry Greb was a A-list fighter of those years.
Oh, I didn't realize it was a
Always,
real fighter.
no, always considered one of the top 10, 15 pound for pound fighters. In fact, because of that, I looked into Frank Manila. Is that the name of the?
Yeah, Frankie
Now,
Manila.
it turns out there was a fighter named Frankie Manila, but he doesn't seem to fit the profile.
Oh, okay. So that's a
He doesn't
fictional.
seem to fit that profile. But Art Cohn, who wrote the screenplay, he was a boxing guy, and he really knew it. He really knew the genre
Hmm.
in a way that I think is
Yeah.
exceptional for a screenwriter.
Yeah. No, you could certainly feel it. Was there anything else you wanted to mention?
My father cared more about boxing than he ever did about movies, in my opinion.
Oh,
My
wow.
father, yeah, no, it's interesting. Uh, and I think that it was because of it was a bond between him and his father. Because the reason why he was boxing in college is because when he was a kid, he took boxing, and it was one of the things that he talked about that he did with his father, and it was very important to him. I mean, over our mantelpiece at home, always there was a photo of Joe Gans. Now, who's ever heard of Joe Gans? Joe Gans was one of the first important African American boxers of the early
Oh.
20th century, and that was who we had over our mantelpiece
Oh,
was
wow.
Joe Gans. I don't remember ever my father watching a movie on television. I don't remember ever him sitting down and watching a movie on television. I remember him every week watching the fights on television. And I think that it was emotional for me, quite frankly, to watch it because I knew that this was so much a part of Dad's life,
Oh, wow.
uh, and probably why everything about the movie. As I said, I can't remember a specific conversation about it, but uh, and he was always talking about boxing. He one time talked about what a great honor it was to meet Muhammad Ali.
Oh,
And he
wow.
had a picture of him with Muhammad Ali. But he, like most heavyweights, admired the lighter boxers because they were better boxers. I mean, he admired Joe Gantz and Harry Greb and people like that, Ray Robinson. And that was a very, very important part of his life. And I think, um, and I don't remember in Jones's biography how much he goes into that, but uh, that was something that, in particular for me, that's an emotional connection with the movie that's very important.
Wow. I did not, I didn't know it ran that deep for him, which, I I was gonna joke earlier, but it's a perfect opportunity to say maybe that's why you and your siblings are not what they would call now Nepo babies, when it's a show business, or because as we discussed, your father didn't talk much, right, about showbiz, so yeah, it makes sense in a way. Not that you didn't
Well, he took
dabble in,
being he
yeah,
took acting very seriously. He
right,
didn't take being a movie star very seriously,
right,
and that's
right.
probably why he had the career that he did. No, it's interesting how much. I mean, his metaphors for things were always going 3 rounds, um, uh, and boxing. And as I said, I it seemed to be a connection with his father. And even though I took boxing lessons as a boy, I did not show any interest or aptitude in it. And I've always wondered, if my father had lived longer, I would have asked him, did I disappoint him by not doing that, because it was such an important part of his life.
Ah, well, I'm sure he'd be proud how you wound up.
No,
You know,
I feel fine about how I wound
yeah.
up, and I should say that one of the problems was that I was actually much more serious about playing the piano, and my piano teacher was absolutely opposed to doing any boxing because
Oh, right, of
he
course.
thought it would injure my hands. And she was a formidable woman who I think was probably willing to go 3 rounds with my dad over this issue too. You see, so
Oh,
I, I
wow.
don't I don't know how much that affected it, but we talked about boxing. I mean, I know about boxing because and I can remember, I mentioned earlier that you don't lead with your right, and that's the kind of thing. If he wanted to talk about someone being incompetent in life in general, he would say this is the kind of person that leads with their right.
Oh,
That would
wow.
be a description with them.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thanks again, Cheyney, for coming back. It's always
Okay.
great to chat with you, and these videos we've done on your father always do so well. So people are always looking for Robert Ryan material, which is great. So let's do it again sometime down the road.
Love to, Robert. Love to talk to people who know about these movies. It's always a pleasure to talk to people who know the movies and appreciate them. So it's great experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. To your top left in just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also, click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching, and thank you again, and I will see you in the next episode.